The news was a shockwave. I mean, it just tore through Hollywood, through politics, culture, everything all at once.
Absolutely. The acclaimed director Rob Reiner and his wife, photographer Michele Reiner, found fatally stabbed in their home.
In their Brentwood home, December 14th, 2025.
And it was this private, just horrific tragedy that became public instantly. And the focus, it immediately shifted to their 32-year-old son, Nick Reiner.
Who was found and charged with the double homicide just hours later.
That's right.
Okay, so let's unpack this. For this deep dive, our mission is to move past the initial shock and really focus on two things that the public often overlooks in cases like this.
Right.
First, the incredibly compressed, volatile timeline leading up to it. And second, the high-stakes legal battle that is just now starting to unfold.
Exactly. We're looking at a perfect storm here. The sources we have, police reports, witness accounts, legal analysis from experts, they give us this really detailed map of those final chaotic hours.
And the legal battle is already drawn.
Oh, clearly. The defense is immediately positioning this as a test of diminished mental capacity, while the prosecution is pushing for capital charges, arguing premeditation.
So we have to start less than 24 hours before the alleged murders. It begins at what experts are already calling the volatility threshold. Late Saturday night, December 13th. Nick Reiner was, by all accounts, exhibiting highly erratic behavior at Conan O'Brien's annual Christmas party.
And this public record of his decline is absolutely essential for the defense. It creates this documented timeline of an acute psychological crisis that was already unfolding.
So what were witnesses saying?
Well, witnesses told outlets like People that Nick was, quote, freaking everyone out, that he was acting erratically and repeatedly asking guests, many of whom were, huge celebrities, if they were famous.
That preoccupation with fame, that seems like more than just someone being drunk at a party.
It really does. It suggests a profound instability, maybe a complete failure of impulse control. I mean, you look at the interaction with the comedian Bill Hader.
Right.
The sources detail how Nick just interrupted Hader's private conversation. And when Hader pushed back, like anyone would, Nick didn't respond normally.
How did he respond?
He reportedly just stood still and staring for a long moment before finally storming off.
That momentary rigidity, that freeze, followed by the emotional outburst, that's going to be Exhibit A for the defense, isn't it?
It has to be. They'll argue it shows a failure of cognitive processing. A neurotypical person handles that mild social rejection by just, apologizing or moving on.
And he freezes.
He freezes. That rigid state suggests dissociation or an acute psychological break. It marks the start of this spiraling crisis. The argument will be, if he was this unable to process minor social cues, how could he possibly form the intent required for murder?
And this public meltdown, it culminated in that immediate rupture with his parents.
Yes, the volatility didn't stop. Sources confirm the chaos at the party led to a very loud argument between Nick and his parents, Rob and Michele.
An argument so intense that his parents just left the party entirely.
They did. And that argument, late Saturday night, that is the last confirmed event linking the victims and the alleged perpetrator before the homicides.
So now we have to jump to the tragedy itself. The bodies of Rob and Michele Reiner were discovered in their Brentwood home on Sunday afternoon, December 14th.
And the discovery itself was just heartbreaking. It was their daughter, Romy, who found them.
How did that happen?
Well, Romy found her father's body after a massage therapist arrived for an appointment and couldn't get in, so she alerted her. But crucially, Romy immediately told the police that she suspected a dangerous relative.
And she cited the argument from the night before.
She specifically cited that heated argument, which immediately directed the entire investigation.
And the sources confirmed the level of violence was extreme. That carries a lot of weight in a murder trial.
Oh, absolutely. The couple was fatally stabbed, and the special allegations confirmed the use of a knife. The reporting indicates just extremely severe injuries. Their throats were slit, and they had stab wounds to multiple other parts of their bodies.
That sounds chaotic.
It is. And when a jury sees evidence of that level of disorganized violence, what we call affective violence, it suggests a crime fueled by rage or frenzy, not a planned, calculated execution.
Okay, let's pivot to the immediate legal response, because the LADA, Nathan Hochman, he came out swinging with the highest charges possible.
He absolutely did. Hochman charged Nick Reiner with 2 counts of first-degree murder.
Yeah.
But what really ratchets up the risk here are the special circumstances allegations.
Which are?
Multiple murders and the personal use of a deadly weapon.
And those special allegations, they automatically open the door to the maximum penalties in California.
That's right. Life imprisonment without parole or the death penalty.
Wow.
Yeah. So that tells you what the prosecution believes. They feel they have enough evidence to prove this was premeditated and intentional, not just manslaughter.
But what complicates that narrative for the prosecution is this sort of behavioral paradox around the arrest itself. You have this scene of extreme violence followed by what appears to be chilling composure. Nick was arrested around 9:15 that night in the Exposition Park area, which is about 14 miles away.
And the LAPD confirmed he was arrested without incident.
Without incident?
And there's video footage of him just walking calmly near his parents' home late Saturday night, and even purchasing a drink at a convenience store right before his apprehension.
You're left with this incredible split, the frenzied rage at the crime scene, then this utter calm.
So if you're the prosecution, how do you frame that? The calm behavior, the 14-mile distance.
They will interpret it as a classic consciousness of guilt. They'll argue he knew exactly what he did and was actively trying to get away to evade justice. That shows the planning and malice aforethought needed for first-degree murder.
But the defense...
The defense will flip that script completely. They'll argue that the calm is evidence of profound psychological distress, a state of dissociation or derealization, where he was completely disconnected from the reality of his own actions. And that brings us right to the central legal battle here, the battle over intent.
Yeah.
The defense has to get this charge reduced from first-degree murder.
And to do that, they have to prove he didn't have premeditation.
Yeah.
So they're relying entirely on this argument of diminished capacity.
The defense attorney, Alan Jackson, he started laying the groundwork for that immediately.
Right from the start. Nick's initial arraignment was postponed for medical reasons, and when he finally appeared in court, he was wearing a jail suicide prevention smock.
And that's not just for show.
No, that is institutional proof. It means the jail facility itself considered him a danger to himself, which immediately gives way to the claim that he was too compromised to form criminal intent.
So let's clarify this for our listeners because the critical legal distinction. What is the difference between arguing legal insanity and arguing diminished capacity?
That's the most important question in this case. Legal insanity is extremely difficult to prove in California. It requires meeting what's called the Imnaten rule. It means the defendant was so mentally ill, they genuinely didn't know the difference between right and wrong. Like, for example, they actually believed their parents were aliens or demons. The defense is probably not even going to try for that.
And diminished capacity.
That's a much lower bar, but it's still complex. Diminished capacity means the defendant was so impaired by mental illness, a defect, or intoxication that they lacked the specific intent or malice aforethought required for the highest charge.
So they're not saying he didn't know it was wrong, but that he was incapable of planning it?
Exactly. The defense will argue the crime was an impulsive act of rage fueled by a complete breakdown, not cool, calculated planning. If they win that argument, the charge could drop all the way to voluntary manslaughter.
But the prosecution has a really strong counter-argument on premeditation, and it goes right back to that party.
They do. A former federal prosecutor, Niama Romani, he claims that argument with his parents is fatal to any real defense. Because this is where the legal definition of premeditation comes into play. You see, premeditation doesn't mean planning for weeks. It just means there was enough time for reflection, even a moment, to form the intent to kill, rather than just reacting in the heat of passion.
And the prosecution will say that moment happened after he left the party.
Precisely. They'll argue that leaving the party, going to the residence, and allegedly returning with a weapon, that is the moment of reflection.
This whole debate over intent and mental capacity, especially when addiction is in the mix, it feels like it's becoming a central focus in these high-stakes criminal cases now.
It really is. And it raises this important question about how our justice system handles celebrity defendants who have these documented mental health and substance abuse issues. We saw a similar debate in the Sean Diddy Combs case.
Right.
His defense tried to introduce expert testimony, arguing his capacity to form intent was compromised by drugs and alcohol use. It just shows that mental impairment, whether it's chronic or acute, is now one of the primary battlegrounds in criminal law.
Before we get too far into the legal statutes, though, we have to understand the decades of struggle that led to this night. What was Nick Reiner's documented history with addiction?
Well, his history is tragically well chronicled. It's a story of profound and chronic addiction that started incredibly young.
How young?
He publicly acknowledged his drug addiction and periods of homelessness. He first went to rehab at the age of 15, and sources close to the family indicated he had gone through approximately 18 rehab trips by the time he was 22.
18, that is just an overwhelming number of attempts, especially when you consider he had access to virtually unlimited resources.
Right, and their struggle was so central to their family life that they channeled it into art.
The film being Charlie.
Yes, which speaks volumes about the anguish they were all experiencing. His experiences heavily inspired that 2015 film, which Nick co-wrote and his father directed.
And Rob Reiner spoke about that.
He did. He spoke openly about how difficult the process was, but also noted that the film became the most satisfying creative experience he ever had because it brought him and Nick closer.
It's just heartbreaking. They poured their love, their resources, their art into trying to save him, but then they hit that legal wall so many parents face.
The wall of adulthood. Once a child turns 18, parents cannot mandate treatment, and the legal threshold for involuntary civil commitment in California is incredibly high.
What do you have to prove?
You have to prove the person is an imminent, demonstrable danger to themselves or others, or is gravely disabled, meaning they literally cannot provide for their own basic needs like food or shelter.
So even with the Reiner family's wealth, their ability to hire the best doctors, if Nick was able to, find shelter sometimes and maintain some basic function, the state couldn't step in.
That's exactly right. The sources noted that while Nick had trashed his parents' guest house in a rage once, there were no public reports that he was a continuous danger to others. The law values individual liberty so highly, so the standard for stripping an adult of their freedom for treatment is, by necessity, very high.
It's a tragedy that highlights how the legal system often can't offer a path for severe addiction until it reaches a catastrophic point.
It really does.
Okay, let's wrap up by talking about the other consequence he's facing, regardless of the criminal outcome. The civil case, specifically his parents' substantial estate.
This brings up one of the most fascinating aspects of this case, the California Slayer statute.
What is that?
Under California law, if Nick is found to have feloniously and intentionally killed his parents, he is legally barred from inheriting any portion of their wealth. The inheritance would just pass to his siblings.
So he's essentially facing two separate legal battles at the same time, with different burdens of proof.
Exactly. And that difference in the burden of proof is the key insight for you to understand here.
Explain it for us.
In the criminal court, the prosecution has to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the highest legal standard there is. But the Slayer statute is tested in a civil court, where the burden of proof is much, much lower. Preponderance of the evidence. Or simply that it is more likely than not 51% that he committed the intentional killing.
So even if the defense successfully argues diminished capacity, or he gets a reduced charge, or even a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, what happens to the inheritance?
Even if he avoids a murder conviction in criminal court, the civil court, using that lower burden of proof, could still find that he intentionally killed his parents to the purpose of the Slayer statute.
So he's almost certainly going to lose the inheritance.
It seems very likely, regardless of whether he's locked up for murder or committed to a state hospital for insanity.
This case is just a catastrophic convergence. A Hollywood dynasty facing a capital murder charge rooted in a chronic, untreated psychological crisis that the family tried and ultimately failed to address with every resource they had.
It is. The legal process is now going to test how our system weighs criminal intent against a documented, debilitating mental illness.
And it forces us to ask a really difficult, painful question.
Given Nick Reiner's documented history, the dozens of failed treatments, the family's immense resources, their very public commitment to helping him, what does this devastating outcome ultimately reveal about the universal and systemic failures in supporting adult children struggling with severe addiction and mental health challenges?
You've been listening to The Deep Dive, where we uncover the stories shaping culture and law. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives that help you get well-informed quickly.